The evening was calm, the lights of the restaurant shone like warm candles, and the quiet murmur of soft music filled the air. People were seated at their tables, talking in low voices, while waiters moved smoothly between them, carrying trays with silverware and glasses that sparkled under the dim lights. It was the kind of place where business meetings happened, where secrets were shared over wine, and where only the wealthy or powerful usually came to eat. And that night, something unusual was about to happen, something that no one inside expected. The heavy wooden door opened slowly, and in stepped a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. His suit was tailored to perfection. His shoes polished so well that they reflected the lights above. His hair neatly styled, and his sharp eyes scanning the room. Some guests turned their heads immediately, whispering among themselves. They recognized him. For he was not just any guest, he was a millionaire, a man whose face had appeared in newspapers and glossy magazines. A man known for building companies, for making money where others saw risk, for turning failures into success. He was the kind of man who seemed untouchable, like a character out of a storybook. But tonight he walked in alone. He didn't arrive with bodyguards or assistants. No one carried his briefcase or pulled his chair. He carried his own folder, thick with papers, tucked under his arm, and this alone surprised the staff, for they were used to seeing important people arrive surrounded by others. Yet here he was, just himself, looking calm but also deeply thoughtful, as though his mind was racing with decisions only he could make. When the hostess greeted him, he smiled politely, his smile confident but faint, and asked for a quiet table in the corner, the kind of table where no one could overhear him. She led him there quickly, aware of who he was, and the other diners pretended not to stare though curiosity filled their eyes. When he sat down, he placed the folder on the table carefully, like it held something fragile, something that could change everything. Then he ordered a simple coffee, nothing fancy, though the restaurant was known for its expensive dishes. His choice showed he wasn't there for food. He was there for something else, perhaps to think, perhaps to decide. And when the waitress brought his drink, she noticed the way he immediately opened the folder, pulling out a stack of papers, his eyes moving quickly across the pages, his pen resting in his hand, ready, as if the act of signing was moments away. From a distance, his face looked calm, but up close, one could see the small signs of stress, the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the table, the way he read the same line more than once, as though debating with himself. Was this the right move? Was this what he should do? It was clear he was alone in his decision. No lawyer at his side, no advisor whispering in his ear. This was a choice he had to make himself, and though he was rich, powerful, and intelligent, there was still something human in that moment, the uncertainty that comes before a big leap. The other guests didn't know what was inside that folder. They only saw a man of wealth sitting alone with documents, but the staff could feel the weight of the atmosphere around him. It was as if the table he sat at had become the center of the room, a place where silence gathered, where something important was waiting to happen. The millionaire didn't notice the glances. His mind was too focused. He sipped his coffee slowly, then returned to the papers, the pen in his hand twirling between his fingers, the faint sound of his breath steady but heavy. For the waitress assigned to his table, the moment felt unusual. She had served countless people before, rich and poor, loud and quiet. But there was something different about him, something that told her this man was carrying a burden tonight. Not just wealth but responsibility, and she couldn't help but watch out of the corner of her eye as she moved between tables. He seemed almost out of place despite his polished look, like a man who belonged to the world of glittering boardrooms but was now sitting in the warmth of a small corner, trying to make sense of something larger than himself. The air around him was filled with mystery. Guests wondered if he was about to close another $1 million deal, or maybe sell a company, or maybe sign something that would change the world of business again. But no one could have guessed that his decision tonight would not only affect him, but also someone unexpected, someone no one would have thought had any role in a millionaire's choices, and yet fate had brought him here alone, with his folder, with his pen, and with his mind deep in thought, unaware that a single whisper from someone he didn't know was about to change everything. Time moved slowly in that restaurant. The glasses clinked softly, the music played, but at his table, the story was only beginning. The millionaire had arrived, calm yet restless, certain yet uncertain, and every eye that dared to look at him could feel something was unfolding. Though none of them yet knew how extraordinary the night would become, the waitress moved quietly between the tables, carrying trays with practiced balance, her smile polite for every guest. But her mind was not entirely on her work. She kept glancing toward the corner where the millionaire sat alone, the folder in front of him, his pen resting near the edge of the papers. She had never served a man of his status before, but what caught her attention was not his wealth. It was the way he looked at those documents, as if they carried the weight of his whole life. She could see tension in his face, the kind of look people have when they are about to make a decision they cannot take back. She came closer to refill his water glass, and as she leaned slightly toward the table, her ears caught a fragment of his phone call. His voice was calm but tight. He was speaking to someone about a contract, about signing it tonight, about making sure it was delivered before midnight. The words she heard made her stomach twist, because one name he mentioned was a name she knew well. It was not the name of a friend, but of a man her family had come to fear, a man her brother had once worked for, and she knew the kind of damage that man could cause. Her brother had trusted that man years ago. He thought he was being given a chance to rise, a chance to build something of his own. But hidden inside the contract were tricks, small lines of text that destroyed everything. Her brother had lost his savings, his house, and nearly his hope. She had watched him crumble day by day. She had watched her family struggle to survive after the disaster. So when she heard the millionaire speak the same name, her heart began to pound. She knew she was only a waitress, just a worker in a restaurant, but she also knew what could happen if he signed those papers. The millionaire seemed lost in his world, staring at the pages, tapping his pen gently. He didn't notice her worried glance. He didn't know that someone near him held a piece of the truth. The waitress debated with herself as she walked back to the counter. Should she say something? Should she remain silent? What right did she have to interfere in the affairs of such a powerful man? But what if she said nothing and later read in the news that he had fallen into the same trap her brother had? The thought made her restless. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried the next tray, her heart telling her that she couldn't just ignore it. From where she stood, she noticed little details. He read the same page over and over again, his eyes narrowing at certain lines, as though even he felt uneasy. Yet he still kept his pen ready to sign. The waitress could sense his hesitation, and it reminded her of her brother on that night long ago, when he too had hesitated, when he too had wondered if he should sign. But he had gone through with it, believing it would open doors, only to find those doors locked forever. She couldn't let another man walk blindly into that same trap. Not if she could stop it, not if her voice could make a difference. She noticed other guests staring at him with admiration, whispering to one another about how impressive he looked, how much power he must hold, but none of them saw what she saw. None of them heard the crack in his voice when he spoke on the phone. None of them knew the shadow behind the name he had mentioned, and that was the strange thing. The room was filled with people, yet only she carried the warning he needed, only she held the memory of her brother's suffering. The question now was whether she was brave enough to speak. The waitress went back to the kitchen for a moment, but even there, while plates clattered and cooks shouted, her mind kept returning to that table in the corner. She tried to distract herself with work, but her heart was loud, telling her this was not just chance, this was fate. Maybe she was put here tonight for a reason. Maybe she was the only one who could change the course of what was about to happen. She looked at the clock on the wall. Time was slipping by, and she knew if she waited too long he would sign and it would be too late. When she returned to the dining room, her eyes met his for just a second. He was frowning at the papers, lost in thought, and she realized how human he looked in that moment. He might be a millionaire, but he was also just a man making choices, a man who could be deceived like anyone else. She thought of her brother again, how he had once said, "If only someone had warned me." Those words rang in her ears, and she knew what she had to do, no matter how crazy it seemed, no matter how risky it was for her job. She couldn't stay silent. Her footsteps slowed as she approached his table again. The tray in her hands felt heavier than usual. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew she would have only one chance, one moment to speak before fear held her back again. The millionaire lifted his pen, ready to write his name, ready to bind himself to the contract, and at that very instant, her heart made the choice her mind was too afraid to make. She leaned slightly closer, her voice trembling but firm, preparing herself for the whisper that could change everything, not just for him, but for herself too, because sometimes courage comes not from power, but from truth held quietly inside an ordinary person waiting for the right moment to speak. The restaurant was quiet except for the soft sound of clinking glasses and the gentle music playing in the background. But at the corner table, a moment was building, a moment no one could predict. The millionaire sat with his pen in hand, the folder open wide, his eyes fixed on the line where his signature was meant to go. It was as if the world outside no longer existed for him. He was about to commit to something huge, something that would bind him, and yet, just a few steps away, the waitress's heart was racing. She knew she had to act, even though her whole body trembled at the thought. She walked closer with slow steps, pretending to be calm, carrying herself like a professional server, but inside, she was torn. Should she stay silent and let him decide his own fate, or should she risk everything and speak? Her job could be at stake. Millionaires were not used to being interrupted, especially by someone they considered ordinary. One word from him to her boss and she could be out of work, but her brother's voice echoed in her head. His regret, his pain, his bitter words. If only someone had told me not to sign. And with that, her fear turned into determination. The millionaire placed his hand on the pen, his fingers tightening. He was about to lower it to the paper when she leaned just a little closer. Her voice low, careful not to be heard by others. Her whisper carried both fear and courage. Don't sign that. The words were so soft, yet so sharp, they cut through the silence of his thoughts. His hand froze, the pen hanging in midair. His eyes widened slightly as he turned his head to look at her. For a moment, the world around them seemed to stop. The other diners were still talking, laughing, unaware of what had just been said. But at his table, everything changed. He stared at her with surprise, his sharp eyes narrowing as if trying to understand what he had heard. He was a man used to being respected, obeyed, admired, but rarely challenged, and never by a waitress. His first instinct was confusion. Why would she say such a thing? What did she know about his business, about the papers? He was about to sign. The waitress felt her knees grow weak under his gaze, but she held her ground. Her voice was trembling but steady enough. She repeated softly, "Please, don't sign it." She didn't explain immediately. She knew blurting out too much might sound foolish, but she also knew she had already gone too far to step back. Her heart pounded in her chest. The room felt smaller, tighter, like all the air had been pulled into this single moment. The millionaire leaned back slowly, setting the pen down but not looking away from her, his expression unreadable. There was no anger yet, no smile either, just deep curiosity mixed with suspicion. He raised an eyebrow, his voice calm but firm. "And why not?" he asked. His tone carried both challenge and intrigue, as though he was daring her to justify her courage. The words sent a wave of heat through her, but she took a breath, steadying herself. She knew this was the point of no return. She looked down for a second, gathering strength, then back at him, her voice hushed so only he could hear. "Because it's not safe, because I know who you're dealing with." The words made his eyes sharpen even more. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face. She didn't look like someone playing a trick. She didn't look like someone trying to impress. She looked sincere, frightened, but determined. He could see that in her trembling hands, in the honesty of her eyes, and that made him hesitate. The other diners had begun to notice something unusual. A few glanced over, curious why the waitress lingered at his table longer than expected. But they couldn't hear the words, they only saw the way he looked at her. A powerful man caught off guard by someone so ordinary. It created a quiet ripple of tension in the air. But the millionaire ignored the stares, his focus entirely on her. The waitress knew she couldn't stop now. She had to give him a reason. But her voice still low, she added, "I've seen what happens to people who sign with that man. My brother did, and he lost everything. I couldn't stand by and let you walk into the same trap." Her words spilled out quickly, her eyes shining with the weight of her memory. She wasn't lying, and he could sense it. There was something raw in the way she spoke, something that made him pause. For the first time in a long while, the millionaire felt uncertain. He was a man of decisions, a man who trusted numbers and logic. But here was a stranger, a young waitress, risking everything to warn him, and strangely, her voice felt more real than the polished advice of his lawyers. He didn't reply right away. He let the silence stretch, his fingers tapping lightly against the table, his mind racing between disbelief and curiosity. between pride and doubt. What if she was right? What if she was the one person bold enough to tell him what no one else dared? The waitress stood there waiting, her heart pounding so hard she feared he could hear it. She didn't know what his reaction would be, anger, dismissal, or perhaps worse, but she knew she had spoken her truth, and that gave her a strange kind of peace. Whatever happened next was in his hands. She had done what she could, and as the millionaire's eyes stayed locked on hers, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his reply, waiting to see if this unexpected whisper would change the course of his night, or perhaps his life. The pen was still resting on the table, the millionaire's hand hovering near it. His eyes fixed on the young waitress who had dared to whisper words no one else in the room would have dreamed of saying. For a long moment neither of them moved, the air between them heavy with silence. The millionaire's face carried no smile, no anger, just an expression of deep thought. He was clearly taken aback, not by the idea that the contract might be dangerous, but by the boldness of the woman standing before him. He narrowed his eyes slightly, as if trying to see through her, to measure if she was lying or telling the truth. He had met countless people in his life, lawyers, politicians, businessmen, and they all spoke with rehearsed confidence, but this woman, this waitress, spoke with trembling honesty. Her voice carried both fear and courage, and that was what unsettled him. She had nothing to gain from warning him, nothing to lose except her job, yet she had chosen to interfere. Leaning back in his chair, he spoke in a low, steady voice that carried across the small space between them. "Why would you say that?" His tone was not harsh, but it was sharp, the kind of tone that demanded truth. His eyes never leaving hers, the waitress felt her throat tighten. She hadn't planned for this moment. She had whispered the warning out of instinct, out of desperation. But now he was asking her to explain, and she knew she had no choice but to speak. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched the tray, her voice low so the other diners wouldn't hear. "Because I know the man behind that contract. My brother worked for him once, he trusted him. He believed the promises, and he lost everything, his job, his savings, his future, all gone because of the fine print no one told him about. I saw what it did to him, and when I heard you say that name, I couldn't stay quiet. I had to tell you." Her words tumbled out quickly, but they were filled with sincerity, the kind that couldn't be faked. The millionaire listened, his fingers tapping lightly against the table, his expression unreadable. She expected him to interrupt, to wave her off, to laugh at her for daring to think she knew better than him, but he didn't. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though intrigued by her bravery. He asked calmly, "Do you realize what you're doing right now? Do you realize who I am, and how easily I could have you removed for interfering?" His words were stern, but there was no real threat in them, more like a test, as though he wanted to see if she would stand her ground. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she did not back away. She nodded slowly. "I know who you are, sir. I know you're powerful, and I know I shouldn't speak like this, but I also know what happens if you sign that paper. I can't watch someone else walk into the same trap my brother did. Even if you don't believe me, even if it costs me my job, I had to say it." Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on his, showing him she meant every word. The millionaire leaned forward slightly now, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze softer but sharper at the same time. He was studying her like a puzzle, one he couldn't quite solve. This was not what he had expected tonight. He had come here to sign a deal, to finish what he thought was just another step in his empire, and instead a waitress had shaken his confidence in the deal with nothing more than a whisper. He could feel the weight of the room, the way the silence stretched around them, though the other guests continued their quiet conversations. He felt as though every sound had dimmed, leaving only this strange moment. Finally, he spoke again, his voice slower now, almost thoughtful. "You've taken a big risk. Most people wouldn't dare. So tell me, why should I trust you? Why should I believe the words of a stranger over the men who've worked with me for years, over the lawyers I've paid millions to? Why you?" The question hung in the air, and the waitress felt the pressure of it like a stone in her chest, but she swallowed hard and answered softly, "Because I have nothing to gain, sir, no reason to lie. I only know what I saw destroy someone I love, and I couldn't keep quiet knowing it might destroy you too." Her answer hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back once more, his fingers now off the pen completely, and for the first time that evening, he let out a quiet breath, the kind that carried both relief and frustration. Relief that maybe he had been stopped from making a mistake, and frustration that it had taken a stranger to open his eyes. He studied her face again, the innocence of her eyes, the firmness in her tone, and deep down he knew she wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was simply trying to protect him. The millionaire didn't thank her yet, but he didn't dismiss her either. He remained silent for a long moment, and that silence was louder than any words could have been. The waitress stood there nervously, wondering if she had crossed a line she could never step back from, but also knowing she wouldn't regret it. Even if she was thrown out of the restaurant, even if she was fired by morning, she had spoken the truth, and that gave her strength. The whole room seemed to hum quietly, the music still playing, the glasses still clinking. But at the corner table, something rare had happened. A powerful man had been warned by someone the world would have ignored, and instead of anger, he felt curiosity and respect building inside him. He hadn't made his decision yet, but one thing was clear. Her words had planted doubt, and once doubt enters the mind of a man about to sign, the pen grows heavier than gold. The millionaire's gaze did not leave. Her face, his sharp eyes studied every word that came out of her mouth, and the waitress knew she could not stop now. She had already crossed the line, already placed herself in danger by speaking. So she took a deep breath and let the truth spill, her voice soft but strong enough to carry the weight of her memories. She told him about her brother, about the man behind the contract, about the way her brother's life had crumbled after trusting that same name. She explained how her brother had once been full of hope. He believed he had found an opportunity that would finally lift him out of struggle. The contract promised security, success, a future, but hidden inside were words designed to trap him. Tiny details, impossible demands, unfair conditions, and once he signed, it was too late. Everything he had built slipped away piece by piece. His savings vanished, his property lost, his pride broken, and soon he was a shadow of the man he once was. She had watched her family's laughter turn into silence, their home filled with worry and regret. The waitress's eyes glistened as she spoke, but she did not cry. She kept her voice steady, her words clear, because she wanted him to understand the seriousness of what was in front of him. She wanted him to see that the pen in his hand was not just ink and paper. It was a trap waiting to close. She admitted she should not know these things, that she should not interfere in his private business. But when she heard the name, when she saw him preparing to sign, she could not stand by and say nothing. Her brother's mistakes haunted her, and she would not let another man walk into the same darkness. The millionaire leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable, his hand no longer near the pen. The waitress could see the way his jaw tightened, the way his lips pressed together as though holding back 1,000 thoughts. The restaurant around them continued as normal. People laughed at their tables, glasses clinked, waiters moved back and forth. But at this one table, time felt slower, heavier, as if the entire world had narrowed down to this conversation. His silence made her heart race, but it also gave her hope because silence meant he was listening, silence meant he had not dismissed her. Finally, he asked in a calm but slightly softer voice, "And what happened to your brother after that? What became of him?" The question was simple, but his tone carried weight. It was not just curiosity, it was a test. He wanted to see if her story was real, if her pain was true. The waitress swallowed and nodded. He tried to fight it, he tried to stand up, but men like that don't lose. Not easily. They crushed him, sir. They crushed him until he had nothing left. Now he works small jobs just to get by. His spirit is broken, and every day I see the regret in his eyes, the regret of signing something he should never have touched. Her words hung in the air like smoke, thick and heavy. The millionaire did not reply at once, but his eyes grew more thoughtful. He knew enough about business to understand that contracts could be weapons. He had avoided traps before. He had seen companies fall apart because of greed and deception, and now this woman was suggesting that he was standing on the same edge. He thought of his advisors, his lawyers, the people who told him this deal was safe, profitable, even brilliant, and then he thought of this waitress, a stranger with no reason to lie, who risked her job and her dignity just to warn him. The contrast was striking. The waitress could feel the eyes of other diners flicking toward her, wondering why she lingered at the table, why the millionaire's attention was locked so firmly on her. She ignored them, her focus was on him. She needed him to believe her. She needed him to see the danger, so she spoke again, her voice firmer now. Sir, I know I am just a waitress to you. I know you have people far more powerful and educated than me advising you, but I also know what I saw destroy my family, and I cannot let it happen again. If you sign, you will regret it, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will come, and it will be too late. Her words struck him deeper than she realized, because in truth, the millionaire had already felt a flicker of doubt about the contract. There were lines that seemed unclear, promises that seemed too perfect. He had brushed them aside, trusting his team, but now, hearing her story, the doubt grew stronger, like a voice inside his own mind had been awakened. He looked at the folder again. The papers that had seemed so important now looked dangerous, sharp, almost poisonous. The millionaire tapped his finger against the table slowly, his eyes narrowing, then lifting back to hers. There was no anger in his face, no annoyance, instead there was something rare, a kind of respect. He could see the courage it had taken for her to speak. He could see the honesty in her eyes, and in that moment, he realized she was not trying to stop him for herself. She was trying to save him, and that thought lingered longer than anything else. The waitress felt her breath shake as she stood there, but she did not step back. She had spoken all she could, and now it was his choice. He could dismiss her, laugh at her, order her away, or he could take her words seriously. She had no power beyond her voice, but she had given it fully. Her truth now rested in his hands. And as the millionaire sat there, looking between the folder and the young woman before him, he felt something he had not felt in years, a sense that perhaps wisdom did not always come from boardrooms and offices. Perhaps sometimes it came from unexpected places, from people the world overlooked. The waitress had revealed her truth, and though the contract still waited on the table, it no longer felt as easy to sign. The weight of her story pressed against him, making the pen heavier, making the decision far more complicated than before. The folder sat open on the table, the contract inside waiting like a trap with sharp teeth hidden under fine words. The pen that had almost touched the paper now lay flat beside it, and the millionaire leaned back in his chair, silent, his mind racing with thoughts he never expected to have in a simple restaurant. The waitress's words echoed again and again in his head, her warning about her brother, her fear, her honesty. He could not shake it off. It clung to him like a shadow. He had built his life on careful decisions, on numbers and strategies. Yet here was a stranger whose whisper carried more weight than all the expensive advice he had paid for. He looked at her again, standing nervously but firmly by the table, her hands gripping the tray tightly, her breathing uneven. She looked fragile, yet her courage made her stronger than most of the men he knew. She had risked her job, her safety, and perhaps even her dignity, all for the sake of a man she had never met before tonight. A man who lived in a world far above hers, and that realization struck him deeply. What kind of courage does it take for someone to warn a millionaire, knowing he could crush her with a single word? The millionaire slowly reached forward, not for the pen, but for the folder. He closed it gently, pressing it shut with both hands as though sealing away something dangerous. The waitress's eyes widened slightly, relief flashing across her face, but also confusion. Was he truly listening to her, or was he simply pausing? He let the silence hang for a moment, the room around them still filled with quiet music and laughter, but at this table, the air was tense, heavy, almost electric. Then, in a move no one expected, he pulled out his phone, his fingers tapping quickly. He pressed it to his ear, and the room seemed to hold its breath. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke. Cancel the deal. I don't care what the papers say. I don't care about the timeline. It's over. Do not move forward with it. His words were sharp, final, the kind of words that ended conversations without debate. He didn't wait for long replies on the other end. He repeated, "It's finished. Don't call me about it again." And then he ended the call. The waitress stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had expected him to ignore her, or at least to brush her aside politely. Never in her life had she imagined that her whisper could stop a deal worth millions. Yet she had just watched him cancel it with a few firm words. She didn't know whether to feel relief or disbelief. Around them, a few diners who had overheard bits of the phone call glanced curiously, whispering among themselves, sensing that something unusual had just happened, though they didn't know the full story. The millionaire placed the phone on the table beside the closed folder, and then he turned his eyes back to her. There was no anger, no frustration. Instead, there was a quiet intensity, almost as if he were measuring her once more. But this time with respect, he said softly, "You may have just saved me from a mistake I could never take back." His voice carried sincerity, the kind that was rare from someone so powerful. The waitress blinked, unsure how to respond. She had not done it for thanks. She had done it because she could not bear to see history repeat itself. But his words made her chest tighten with unexpected warmth. For a man who had everything, money, power, influence, it was not easy to admit that someone else had guided him. But he did not hide it. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, and continued, "Do you realize what that contract could have done to me, to my company, to the people who depend on me? You were right. There were things in there I should have seen, things I ignored because I wanted to believe it was safe. But you saw the truth, or at least you had the courage to speak it." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of humility. The waitress lowered her eyes for a moment, her voice quiet but firm. "I only did what I had to, sir. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't watch it happen again." Her words were simple, but they carried the same strength as her first whisper, and the millionaire knew she meant it. She wasn't seeking reward or recognition. She was simply protecting someone, even if that someone was a stranger, and that realization made her even more remarkable in his eyes. He glanced once more at the folder, then pushed it away from himself as though it no longer mattered. The deal that had seemed so important when he walked into the restaurant now felt small compared to what had just unfolded. He had walked in ready to sign without question, but he was leaving with something far more valuable than another contract. He was leaving with a reminder that wisdom can come from unexpected places, that sometimes the truth is spoken not by lawyers in expensive suits, but by ordinary people who carry scars from the past. Around them, the restaurant continued as usual, but at that table, the course of the night had shifted completely. The millionaire had made his decision, not with ink on paper, but with words that carried finality, and it was all because of a single whisper from a young waitress who refused to let silence win. The pen remained untouched, the contract unsigned, and for the first time in a long while, the millionaire felt lighter, not because he had gained something, but because he had avoided losing everything. The waitress let out a quiet breath, relief washing over her. Though part of her still couldn't believe what had happened. She had spoken, he had listened, and together they had changed the outcome of something far bigger than either of them had planned. She didn't know what would happen next, whether he would forget her by tomorrow or whether this moment would stay with him. But she knew she had done the right thing, and that was enough. The millionaire, however, knew something she did not. This night, this warning, this act of courage would not leave his memory. It had already begun to reshape the way he thought about trust, about decisions, about the voices worth listening to. He had canceled the deal, but in truth, what he had really done was open his mind, and that was more valuable than any signature could ever be. The waitress thought the moment was over. She thought she would simply step back, let him finish his coffee and return to the quiet rhythm of her job. But the millionaire did not look away. His eyes followed her as if searching for something more. He had closed the folder. He had canceled the deal. Yet a new thought was rising inside him. Something about this young woman's honesty made him want to know her story. Not just the warning she gave, but who she was beyond the apron she wore. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, softer, but carrying a weight that made her heart skip. "What's your name?" he asked. The waitress blinked, caught off guard. No customer had ever asked her that with such genuine interest. She hesitated before answering. "My name is Anna, sir." Her tone polite but cautious. She did not want to seem too familiar. After all, this was still a man whose wealth and power placed him far above her world. The millionaire nodded slowly, repeating the name under his breath as if committing it to memory. Then he asked, "Tell me, Anna, why are you working here? You seem too sharp, too observant, to be just serving tables." His question surprised her even more. She looked down at the tray in her hands, then back at him, unsure if she should answer. But his gaze was steady, not mocking, not condescending, only curious, and so she told him the truth. She explained that she had once dreamed of studying further, maybe law, maybe business, something that would give her the power to fight back against people like the man behind the contract. But after her brother's downfall, her family had been left with heavy debts, her parents too tired and broken to manage alone. So she had taken up work, 2 jobs at times, waitressing during the day and helping with small tasks at night, anything to keep her family afloat. School had slipped away like a dream, but she had never stopped learning. She read contracts online, researched loopholes, and tried to understand the traps that had caught her brother, so that no one she cared about would ever fall again. The millionaire listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable at first, but his eyes betrayed something rare, a flicker of respect. He could see that this woman, though ordinary in the eyes of the world, carried extraordinary strength. She had turned her pain into knowledge, her grief into awareness, and that awareness had just saved him. He thought of the people who surrounded him in his own life, lawyers, advisors, board members, and he realized how often they cared only for profit, how rarely they spoke out of pure concern for another person. When she finished speaking, she lowered her eyes again, embarrassed that she had shared so much, but to her surprise, he did not dismiss her. Instead, he leaned back, studying her with new interest, and then he said something that made her freeze. "What if I told you I could use someone like you on my team?" His words were calm, but they struck her like a thunderbolt. She blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. She whispered back, "Me, on your team? But I'm just a waitress, sir." He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "No, you're not just a waitress, Anna. You saw what my lawyers and advisors failed to see. And you had the courage to tell me the truth when everyone else stayed silent. That's rare, rarer than money, rarer than skill. Honesty and courage cannot be bought, and that's exactly what I need." His voice carried certainty, the kind that left no room for doubt. He wasn't offering her charity. He was offering her an opportunity, something she had once dreamed of but believed was forever out of reach. Anna's breath caught, her heart raced. She felt the room spin for a moment. She wanted to believe him, but fear whispered in her mind. What if he was just being polite? What if he was testing her? What if tomorrow he forgot about this promise? She shook her head slightly, stammering, "I don't think I could, sir. I don't have the education. I don't have the right background. I wouldn't know where to start." Her doubts poured out quickly, but the millionaire only raised a hand gently, stopping her words. "You've already started," he said firmly. "You've already proven yourself tonight. The rest can be learned, but courage cannot be taught. Honesty cannot be taught, and you have both. That's what matters." His tone was so steady, so confident, that it almost silenced the storm of doubt inside her. She stared at him, speechless, torn between disbelief and hope. Her tray felt heavier in her hands, her knees weak, but there was a small light beginning to flicker in her heart. A light she had not felt in years. The restaurant around them carried on as usual. No one at the other tables knew that a life was being rewritten in that quiet corner. But Anna could feel it, something inside her shifting. She had come into work that evening expecting nothing more than another long shift, another night of tired feet and heavy trays, and now here she was, being told by a millionaire that her honesty mattered, that her voice had power. It was almost too much to take in. She whispered softly, her voice trembling, "Why me, sir? Out of all the people you know, why would you choose me?" And the millionaire's answer was simple, "Because you cared when you didn't have to." His words landed with a force greater than any compliment she had ever heard, because they were true. She had spoken not for gain, not for recognition, but simply because her heart told her she must, and in that act, she had shown more value than any degree or polished resume. For the first time that evening, Anna allowed herself a small smile, uncertain but real. Maybe, just maybe. This was the chance she had been waiting for. The chance to turn her pain into purpose, to turn her brother's loss into something meaningful. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew one thing with certainty. The millionaire's offer was not just kindness, it was respect, and that respect was something she had long believed people like her would never receive. The night had begun with a folder, a pen, and a whisper. But now it was moving towards something greater, an opportunity, a door she never thought would open. And as she stood there, stunned by his words, she realized that sometimes fate arrives not in grand moments, but in quiet ones, where a whisper can change not just the path of a millionaire, but the life of an ordinary waitress. As well, the room was still alive with the soft sounds of music and gentle chatter. But something had shifted, something everyone could feel even if they didn't know why. The millionaire sat at his corner table, no longer leaning over the contract, no longer holding the pen that had nearly sealed his fate. Instead, he was looking at Anna, the waitress who had dared to whisper the truth, and his expression was not one of pride or arrogance but of respect. A rare thing for a man of his status. The other diners began to notice, their conversations slowing as they tried to guess what was happening. Anna still stood there with the tray in her hands, her breath shallow, her mind spinning. She could hardly believe what she had just witnessed. This man, who held power, wealth, and influence, had actually listened to her, a waitress, a stranger in his world. Not only had he listened, but he had acted. He had canceled a deal worth millions right there at the table. Her whisper had stopped a storm before it began, and now, his words about her honesty and courage lingered in her ears, giving her a strength she didn't know she had. The diners near their table leaned closer, trying to catch pieces of the conversation. Some of them gasped quietly when they heard the words, "Cancel the deal." Others whispered among themselves, their curiosity growing, because it wasn't every day that a powerful man admitted being stopped by an ordinary voice. Soon the energy of the whole restaurant shifted. People were not only curious, they were inspired. They saw in Anna something extraordinary. The bravery to speak truth when silence would have been easier. The millionaire noticed the eyes around them, but he didn't care. He was not ashamed. In fact, a small part of him was proud. Proud that he had listened. Proud that he had not let arrogance blind him. He raised his glass of water slightly, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement, not to the crowd, but to the young woman standing before him, and when she met his eyes again, she felt a warmth in her chest, the kind of warmth that comes when your voice, no matter how small, is finally heard. As Anna turned slightly to step away, still unsure if she should return to her duties or stay, the millionaire spoke again. His voice steady but soft enough for only those near the table to hear. "Anna, people like you remind me that wisdom doesn't always wear a suit, sometimes it carries a tray." His words made her cheeks flush. She lowered her eyes shyly, but inside, her heart glowed, because no one had ever told her that her voice mattered in such a way. No one had ever told her she carried wisdom. The ripple of curiosity grew stronger in the room. One older gentleman at another table whispered, "What did she say to him?" While a woman nearby added, "Whatever it was, he listened." Imagine that, a millionaire listening to a waitress. And soon the whispers became like a quiet wave moving across the restaurant. People admired the scene, because it was not something you saw every day. It was not money or power that had taken control of the moment, but courage, plain and simple courage. Anna tried to slip away to the back, embarrassed by the attention, but before she could, something surprising happened. A few diners nearby began to clap softly, at first just one or two, then more joined, the sound of applause growing slowly, filling the air. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was enough to make her freeze. She turned back wide-eyed, realizing they were clapping for her, not for the millionaire, not for the canceled deal, but for her bravery, her whisper, her truth, her hands trembled as she looked around, seeing faces smiling at her, nodding in quiet approval. The millionaire didn't stop them. In fact, he leaned back in his chair, watching as the room gave her the recognition she had never expected. He understood why they clapped, because in her courage, they saw something human, something they themselves might wish they had, the courage to speak when silence felt safer. Anna felt her eyes sting with tears, not of sadness but of relief. For the first time since her brother's downfall, she felt as if the pain she carried had turned into something meaningful, something that could help others. When the clapping faded, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. But the atmosphere was different now, lighter, warmer, filled with quiet respect for the young woman who had spoken the truth. Anna finally stepped away, her hands still shaking, and disappeared toward the counter. But her heart was no longer heavy. She had done something that mattered, and the entire room had witnessed it. She would never forget that moment, and neither would they. The millionaire stayed at the table for a while longer, his coffee now cold, the folder untouched, but his mind alive. He thought of how close he had come to making a mistake, how close he had been to signing away something valuable, and how fate had placed a waitress in his path at just the right time. He knew he would never see the world in quite the same way again, and he knew he would not let Anna's courage be forgotten, because courage like that deserved more than a quiet thank you. As he rose to leave, He gave the staff a polite nod, but before stepping out, he paused near the counter where Anna stood, still nervous and unsure. He looked at her one last time, his voice calm but filled with meaning. "You changed more than my night, Anna. You changed my way of seeing things." Then he offered her a faint smile, the kind that carried both gratitude and respect, and with that, he walked out into the night, leaving behind not just the canceled deal, but also a story that would be remembered. The diners kept whispering long after he was gone. Some told the staff they had witnessed something rare. Others promised they would share the story with friends, and within days, it would spread beyond the walls of that restaurant. A tale of a millionaire, a waitress, and a whisper that stunned a room full of strangers. But more than that, it would remind people everywhere that truth can come from the most unexpected voices, and that sometimes, the smallest act of bravery can change everything. Anna stood quietly at the counter, her heart still racing, but for the first time in a long while, she felt proud not of being perfect, not of being strong all the time, but proud that she had spoken, proud that she had trusted her voice, and proud that she had been heard. The restaurant would close later that night. The tables would be cleaned, the lights dimmed, but in her heart, she knew that this night would never fade, because it was the night a whisper became powerful enough to stop a storm and turn a whole room into witnesses of courage.